Hi, my name is Anne McElhinney.
And I'm Phelan McAleer.
And welcome to the Anne and Phelan Scoop. This is not the Daily Virus. This is the weekly scoop.
Oh, Anne, remind me what the Daily Virus is.
Yeah, so we have a Daily Virus. We have a podcast, an audio podcast that comes out every day, except for Fridays. And it tells the highs and the lows of what's happening with the pandemic. And, you know, it's important. I mean, when we started this, by the way, we kind of thought, you know, I think like a lot of people, I think we thought that the pandemic was going to last for like a month.
Not the pandemic.
Sorry, no, actually you're right, Philip. Sorry, that the lockdown would last a month. You're right. You're absolutely listen. And guess what? Guess how long the lockdown has lasted now? 22
and a half weeks.
No, 22 weeks, which is 5.5 months.
Of a 2-week flatten the curve lockdown.
Flatten the curve.
So we talk about that every day, so don't miss that.
And it's important.
Wherever you get your podcasts.
Because I don't know what the pandemic has been like for you, but you know the way, like I certainly have to admit that I did not learn how to cook sourdough bread, but we did learn how to eat sourdough bread and ice cream and pandemic cocktails and chocolate. Yes. Anyway, please join us for the Daily Virus, and you can get that on any of your platforms.
I'm kind of glad we didn't learn to cook sourdough bread, because I think you bake sourdough bread rather than cook it, don't you?
Oh, very technical. Anyway, thank you very much for Glenn in New Jersey, who just wrote and said, fresh air at last. Here I was, choking to death on the airwaves, pollution, and I discovered you. Wonderful. Thanks so much. Thank you, Glenn. And Jenny, thank you so much. You two are a hoot. You never take the ridiculousness of the US too seriously, pointing out the humor in the hypocrisy. When I'm done listening, my mood is more upbeat. I especially love your comments on the woman I personally detest more than any other, Michelle O. Thank you so much, Jenny.
So that you can leave comments like that on the Apple podcast app, and we really appreciate them. We read them all. We're interested in them all, and so are Apple, because the more comments that are there, the easier it is for people to find us, the more promotion we get. So please give as much as you can. In a sense, give as many comments as you can.
And give as much as you can as well, because you can actually donate at the unreportedstoriesociety.com. But today we have a very, very packed
We have a very packed show, which is interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to talk to people about timings. Is the show too long, too short? We always try to keep it at 45, 50 minutes, but maybe in the pandemic that's not important because people don't commute to work anymore. So let us know if you'd like the show to be a bit longer. I think this one will be. What's in the show today, Anne?
So, as you know, the big news from last week was that Kamala Harris, which actually, Kamala Harris has been chosen as the VP pick for Joe Biden, and she has a message for everyone involved in fracking. You're going to want to hear that.
Kamala Harris? Aren't you being...
Well,
yeah.
We're going to come to that.
And Donziger, so Stephen Donziger, our old friend, has been disbarred. We'll get on to that. Obamagate, new details emerging every day, and new details about our exciting new project.
And in crazy California, from the Sunshine State to the Blackout State. And we remember last week we asked you to read a book called American Dirt.
Latino.
How one author, and basically, anyway, we're going to talk about American Dirt and the controversy connected with American Dirt, which became a massive controversy at the beginning of the year. We're going to look into why that happened and what it tells all of us about the new world order in the art world.
And humanity, and how jealous and vindictive they really are. And talking of authors, we have interviewed a very unique author who has cornered the market in biblical fiction, and why his latest novel has so much to say about the modern world and in the cancel culture and the modern and Me Too and abortion and sexism and all that. And sex trafficking. I said I was going to answer your questions this week, but questions have just come in overnight, and I really want to answer all your questions. So I'm going to put this off to next week. I'm going to give you the full lowdown on the myths and misapprehensions about sex trafficking. So we're going to do that next week.
And then at the very end of the show today, we have a fabulous recipe, which I'm not 100% sure if we didn't do this before, but I don't think we did it with such detail. So the recipe is melanzane al parmigiana.
I don't think we did it before.
Melanzane al parmigiana. So it's actually...
Latino.
It's because I learned this from Michelle Obama, how important it is that you always...
Latino,
that you always pronounce things exactly as they are intended to be. So actually actually, to most people who speak in the English language, this is eggplant parmesan. But in Italy, and I actually did live in Italy, so I actually am able to say this, melanzane alle parmigiana. And it's actually a really, really great recipe, and I'm going to talk about that at the end of the show. But first, let's talk about Kamala. So before we even got going here in the last week, there was a massive, massive controversy about how do you say Kamala. Let's have a listen to what happened on Tucker Carlson's show.
By smearing Trump supporters as bigots, he hoped to advance his career. And Kamala Harris, of all people, can respect that.
Tucker, can I just say one quick thing, because this is something that will serve you and your fellow hosts on Fox. Her name is pronounced comma, like the punctuation mark la, Kamala. Okay? Seriously, I've heard every sort of bastardization.
So what?
So everyone who's mispronounced my name over the last 40 years, because I'm only 40, is a racist or something. Sometimes people mispronounce your name. Right.
Well, it's kind of interesting who's also mispronouncing
exactly.
the name of the VP.
Let's hear who introduced Kamala, or whatever it is, Kamala, whatever, I can't know what it is. Let's hear, Kamala, or as they call her, as I would say in Northern Ireland, Kamala.
Let's hear how somebody quite famous has a problem pronouncing her name.
Kamala.
Let's hear that again.
Kamala.
And let's hear that again.
Kamala.
Yes.
Anyway,
does that mean Joe Biden is a racist?
So, sorry, say that again?
Does that mean Joe Biden's a racist?
I'm sure it's not true, Phil.
No. Corn pop.
Like regular people, he has a problem with pronunciation.
Yes.
But anyway, a lot of people have talked this last week about Kamala Harris and her past with criminal justice and criminal justice reform and about drug dealers up in San Francisco. But the thing that we were very conscious of was something else that she said.
Can I just say something? So people were made, there's two schools of thoughts on her, that she was this kind of cop friend up in San Francisco putting people in jail because their kids wouldn't go to school, putting marijuana users in jail. And then now she's this BLM, defund the police radical. And, actually, both are true, but what that actually proves is she has no principles. And this takes us on to our next little segment.
Yeah, so she basically, let's hear what she has to say about fracking. I think a lot of people out there are going to be quite interested in that.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So, yes, and starting with what we can do on day one around public lands, right?
So, our message, I suppose, to Kamala Harris is that Hillary Clinton took the same decision that you've just decided, to say that you're going to ban fracking, which, by the way, basically saying that proves that you know nothing about the oil and gas business.
She knows nothing about it.
At right now, this minute in the United States, there's probably about 1 million fracked wells in the United States, about 1 million. So it shows how much she knows about oil and gas. But I hope she gets an education. I hope she doesn't become the VP if that's what she is intending to do, because this will be a disaster for America's...
But Hillary Clinton had, as you say, had the same strategy. And you know where fracking is particular? It's prominent in Texas, in Oklahoma, but 3 places where there was no fracking, suddenly there was fracking or fracking related industries and have experienced unprecedented booms in these areas. The 3 states of Pennsylvania, Ohio and Wisconsin. Can you remind me of who lost the election because they lost those 3 states?
I can't remember that. I can't remember. But, anyway, somehow they're very, very important, apparently. And, yeah.
So Wisconsin, just to let you know, Wisconsin doesn't have any fracking. But to frack, you need sand. And Wisconsin has a lot of sand. And all the sand for this fracking is quarried and driven in trucks and trains. A lot of it, sorry.
From Wisconsin.
So
basically, yes. So those states are very, very grateful for what fracking has done for their economies, how it's transformed their economies. So for someone like Kamala from Southern, from California, from it's just amazing. And by the way, California is a very big energy state, an enormous amount of oil and gas business here, but she doesn't know anything about it. She really doesn't know. She's one of those. Yeah. She's basically one of those people who doesn't know what powers the electricity that she uses for her electric car.
Well, she's from California, and we'll come to that later on. Of course, she doesn't know.
Talking of oil and gas, in California,
that's right.
It brings us to another company that's based actually here, Chevron.
Yes, right.
Tell us what's happening with them.
By the way, did you know El Segundo, which is the neighbouring district here to Venice, it is called El Segundo because?
Second something.
Chevron's second oil refinery.
There you go. I kind of knew that at some level.
As I told you.
There you go.
So Stephen Donziger sued Chevron for allegedly polluting the Amazon rainforest. Chevron said, we were never there, it was Texaco. They bought Texaco. Texaco pulled out of there in 1993. The state oil company has been drilling for oil there ever since. And these left-wing state oil companies, as we know, are notoriously, look at Eastern Europe, it's an environmental hellhole. That's what communism does. Capitalism cleans up places. But Donziger ignored all that, blamed Chevron, and got an 18 billion with a B. Billion.
$18 billion
billion.
Decision, right? They decided to award him and his group $18 billion.
Through a long, complicated process, mostly powered by his own hubris, actually, and getting a hagiographic documentary made about himself, he left himself open to all sorts of discovery. And the lawyers discovered that he actually bribed the judge and paid the judge $500,000 for this $18 billion award. I wrote a play about it called The $18 Billion Prize, which was on in San Francisco. And it's a fascinating story. Anyway, the latest upshot is Donziger, for his role in bribing the judge, and he did other despicable things too. He actually, the Ecuadorian government decided, we're going to clean up some of this mess, and they allocated $100,000 per little, remnant of a well to clean up the mess. He went crazy, because it showed that it was actually the government was responsible for it, but B, because it was so cheap
to fix
whatever was the problem. And by the way, because oil evaporates, especially in the rainforest, right? So there's little remnants, but there's no serious harm from them. It's like saying a road. By the way, that road out there in front of our house are all freeways. They're all made of oil products, But
I think the bigger, the really significant part of all of this is that Chevron didn't do anything wrong.
That's right.
So the $18 billion prize, which was...
And the lawyer was determined to stop them, stopping even the government from cleaning up their own backyard. So he has now been barred from practicing law in New York for his basically criminal activity. And actually, talking of criminal activity, he has a court case coming up in mid-September, criminal contempt, because he's been ordered to hand over his phones and computers to show further criminal activity. He has refused. Maybe it's civil activity. Anyway, he has refused to hand over the phones and the computers. This is a criminal contempt, and that trial is coming up in mid-September. I don't know if it's still going ahead because of COVID. We'll be keeping you fully informed, but the wheels of justice are turning slowly, but they're moving in the right direction. Excuse me.
Have a drink there, Phelan.
Yes. So the latest, Obamagate. Yeah.
Tell us the latest about the Obamagate project, Phelan, which is very, very exciting.
Oh yes, well, there's both news developments. An FBI agent has pled guilty to altering an email from the CIA to show...
A lawyer, and he was a lawyer.
He was a lawyer.
A lawyer from the FBI. It's an extraordinary thing.
It's just...
it's just beyond belief, by the way. And I'd like to think that it's the beginning of people being brought to book for what they did. But this guy is a lawyer. A regular person changing a document for some reason, right? By the way, it's still an awful bloody thing, an awful thing to do. But a lawyer really understands how significant this is. So this is what he did, and he has pled guilty. What's going to happen to him, Phelan?
Who knows? He's cooperating with the Durham investigation. So just to give you some background, to try and undermine the Trump campaign and Trump presidency, the FBI launched this fake Russia investigation. So to do that, they had to go in front of the Fisa court, which is supposed to be this top secret hard nut court, because surveilling American citizens is not
super serious.
It's super serious. So the Horowitz, the Inspector General, found 17 errors and omissions in the Fisa warrants, which the judge never picked up on. But one of them was an outright fraud. The reason Carter Page, the reason Carter Page had all these dodgy Russian connections. They looked at him and saw, oh my God,
yeah,
that man.
A lot of dodgy Russian connections. Why would that be, Phelim?
Because he was working for the CIA. The CIA said to him, you're
That's what you do, by the way, when you work for the CIA. You have dodgy relations with people because you're trying to get information.
Yes, and you're trying to turn them and you're trying to make them a source. So the CIA wrote to the FBI and said, this guy Carter Page, don't worry about him. He's actually working for us. So all those weird connections you see, we're actually encouraging those. He's going out of his way. He is risking his life for this country.
What did the FBI do with that information?
They changed the word does not work for the CIA, does work to the CIA, and put in the word not. He made it a negative and said does not work for the CIA and took out any other information. So, I mean, completely misrepresented. But, and what's really interesting is the way the media have refused to cover this. Rachel Maddow is so obsessed with the Russia investigation that it became a joke. Didn't mention it. Don Lemon on CNN didn't mention it. Anderson Cooper didn't mention it. Look, the media is determined. They were determined to push the false Russia hoax. Now they're determined to cover up the Russia scandal.
So that actually then creates a need, Phelim, doesn't it? It creates a need for the real story, the truth of what happened here, to be produced and created in some format that would be easy for the general public to get access to. So hopefully someone will create a project like that and get it out before the election, before people are making a decision about what's right or wrong.
At the moment, Showtime are spending up to $100 million on a 2-part mini-series called The Comey Rule, on how Trump was compromised by Russia and the Russia investigation.
100 million being spent by Showtime
40 million producing it, and a further over 40 to market it. Comey's Peter Strzok's book is coming out on 8th of September. This is Hollywood and the mainstream media
getting together
and determined to push. I mean, really trying to change the course of an election, because Showtime originally said this is not coming out until end of November. This cast rebelled and said they wouldn't promote it, because they wanted to influence the election. So look, we can't tell you much about our project at the moment. But what we can say is that there'll be a few familiar faces. Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, James Comey will all be there. And, you remember FBI lovebirds, Dean Cain and Christy Swanson. We're not saying who's involved yet, but there'll be a few familiar faces and a few unusual faces. Look, this is, if you want to find out more, go to Unreported Story Society.
And sign up.
Go to Unreported Story Society. Sign up, you'll get more information. We're sending out emails, you'll be the first to know. This is one of our most important projects.
Yes.
It really is. But it's easy to tell. It's very funny too, actually.
It's very funny. And if you think, as we said again, so Showtime are spending $100 million on this one particular project, which is its 2-part, big, massive drama with all kinds of big actors. And then Peter Strzok's book is coming out. You can imagine, we can all predict already that every late night talk show host is going to have him on. They're going to have Lisa Page on. They're going to so that'll be worth millions and millions and millions of dollars of advertising, basically, of free advertising. So I think we should do something about telling the truth. Anyway, let's move on to something that's happening here in Crazy California.
Crazy California.
So Crazy California, and again, as I said earlier, by the way, in the show, California is an energy leader in the world, like
Chevron,
huge.
El Segundo.
Absolutely, but the Central Valley, the huge amount of oil production here, and here in Los Angeles.
And guess what we're suffering at the moment?
Guess what's happening in California right now with this place, which is an energy capital in the world? We have blackouts. And blackout warnings and electricity.
It's all because of
the Green New Deal.
The Green New Deal. We were the first before Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, a Latino. Before she got into Congress, I said that in French. Is that French?
Go on ahead now.
We decided to California decided to adopt a Green New Deal, and they decided to close down gas, nuclear. We've no more nuclear plants, and that's fine during the day, because solar and wind kind of work during the day, even though they don't. But you can't save that energy, and at night when solar doesn't work because the sun don't shine no more.
And you can't depend on wind. You can sort of depend on the sun
So
here.
just to quote the Wall Street Journal, supply shortages can occur in the evening when solar energy plunges, but demand for power runs high. That's what happened this weekend. We had a heat wave here. But this is California. You do have heat waves. So many natural gas and nuclear plants that can generate power 24/7 have shut down in recent years because they can't compete with heavily subsidized green energy. So you close down the most efficient and most reliable sources to subsidize something that is intermittent and unreliable. And guess what you get?
The lights don't work.
Yes.
The lights don't work, the dishwasher doesn't work, the immersion blender doesn't work, the internet doesn't work, the television doesn't work.
The cold beer doesn't arrive.
The cold beer doesn't arrive. As I said,
horror.
For some people in the third world, electricity is life and death. But for people like ourselves who are lucky enough to live in places where there is a lot of energy, it's cold beer and washing machines. And God bless them both. Alrighty. We're moving on.
Yes, so we came across this story recently. I mean, it's an ongoing story, but really it's
we could spend a week on this, by the way,
it's
and
a
we'd
lovely
love
story.
to. We love this story.
So it's about American Dirt. We asked you to read the book last week. It's our little book club, actually, and we've read it. It's okay.
But the reason for all of this is a teachable moment. The reason we are focusing on this, and we're going to spend a bit of time talking about it today, is it's a teachable moment about the new world order in the art world and what will and will not be tolerated. So the book itself is written by Janine Cummings, and it tells the story of Lydia Quixano, a middle-class bookstore owner in Acapulco, Mexico. Her entire family is gunned down after her husband, a journalist, publishes an article about the head of the local cartel, a man Lydia was flirting with. She and her son Luca escape the massacre and, in fear of the cartel, find themselves taking a dangerous trek north to the United States.
It's immigration porn. It's immigration porn too. It's like it's just a poor woman and her child.
But there's also a lot of it's quite violent. So the book was published on January the 21st.
Oh, can we add some local colour?
We should add some local colour.
About the author,
because we thought this was quite funny. So we were looking up to find out more about Janine Cummings. So she was a Rose of Tralee, and a lot of you guys probably, Americans, would not know what that is, but it's basically an Irish lovely girl competition, and it's like a lovely girl. So it's girls from all over the world who have some connection with Ireland. They have to have some connection with Ireland.
Irish American.
So there'll be a rose from Australia and a rose from America and a rose
Apple
from
rose and New Jersey rose.
All over the place. Anyway, she was a Rose of Tralee back in the day.
And she worked at a pub in Belfast, which is
apropos.
Where I never want to see her. I think no Rose of Tralee should ever work at a pub in Belfast.
Apropos of nothing. Anyway, the book.
It's the opposite of a lovely girl.
The book came out. American Dirt came out January the 21st, 2020, and to say that everyone loved it is actually understating it, right?
Yes.
It's actually understating it. This book could not have been loved more, and it was loved so much that a 7-figure sum was paid for the book after a very intense bidding war
by publishers. In advance.
All the publishers wanted it. All of them wanted it.
Yeah.
And then it debuted on the New York Times bestseller list at numero uno. At numero uno. Hang on one second there. At numero uno. And by the way, and in an unusual decision by the New York Times, they ran separate reviews of the book, both in the daily paper and in the weekly book review section, as well as publishing an extract from the book.
Oh yeah,
Stephen King loved it.
But that's what the New York Times do, and this is what conservatives don't realize. We have something come out, and we write to a media outlet, and they say we'll do a piece on that, and they never look at how, when the left get behind something, how they cover something. So there's the New York Times. They wanted to promote this immigration, pro-immigration romance thriller, whatever it is. And so they had 2 separate reviews, not 1, not 2. They ran an excerpt, right? But that's only the part of it. You can bet somebody mentioned it in the column.
And by the way, and as we have discussed before, maybe not on the scoop, but actually important just to mention, it was also a #1 New York Times bestseller. And by the way, just so that everyone knows, the New York Times bestseller list is not made up of strict numbers. It's actually a curated thing. We are actually New York Times bestsellers.
But we almost weren't. So our book made enough sales to get on the list, but because the list is an editorial decision, they decided we shouldn't get on the list. But also they do things like
we did because there was an outcry.
Yeah, we managed to raise an outcry and eventually we got on. But they also do things like interview the woman. There's a section in the motoring section, my first car, right, or my favorite holiday in the travel section. So they probably interviewed this author for that. And at the end mention the book. So every time you open a book or a page or a website,
it's everywhere.
You're reminded about this person. They do it. They don't do one piece on it.
But I'm going to go on and say, as I said, everyone loved this. Stephen King, I defy anyone to read the first 7 pages of this book and not finish it. An extraordinary piece of work, he said. A perfect balancing act with terror on one side and love on the other. I'll never stop thinking of it, somebody called Anne Patchett. Julia Alvarez, by the way, said, a dazzling accomplishment.
Yes. There's a Maureen Corrigan out of NPR, American Dirt is the novel for me. Nails what it's like to live in this age of anxiety. People magazine, made it book of the week, tense, illuminating. New York Times, the novel, one of the reviews in the New York Times, the novel is a heart-stopping story of survival, danger, and love. Washington Post.
I devoured the novel in a dry-eyed adrenaline rush, a profoundly moving reading experience, and it's on and on and on and
LA
on.
Times.
The LA Times.
Oh, and
then, La Crème de la Crème.
That's French.
La Crème de la
Crème de la
Crème. Oprah Winfrey Club Choice. It was the Oprah Winfrey Club Choice Book Club. Yeah. So let's hear Oprah talk about the book.
Hello, fellow book lovers. So excited to tell you about this next Oprah's Book Club pick. It's called American Dirt by Janine Cummings. This book, American Dirt, just gutted me. And I didn't just read this book, I inhabited this book. I'm hoping that is going to resonate with many of you and your concerns.
Pretty good endorsement there, by the way. And once your book, by the way, has been endorsed and put into the Oprah Winfrey Club, by the way, which I don't even think it has 100 books yet. I think it's at number 83 right now. So, it's an incredible thing. It's life-changing, by the way, my faltering. But Marie Claire loved it, the San Francisco Chronicle, Chicago Tribune, on and on and on. We can't actually... Yeah. Everyone loved it, including, by the way, an awful lot of Latino writers. Loved it. Loved it. Then... A woman called Miriam Gorba wrote who's an Latinx. Sorry, she I think describes herself as a queer Latinx writer. Wrote a scathing blog post. Now she herself is the author of a book called Mean, and I can tell you one thing: her blog post about this book, American Dirt, is very, 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 very angry. And the summary, by the way, I'm going to summarize this, and I think you've got a couple of quotes you want to do from it, Phelan, but I think I want to summarize Miriam Gorba's blog posting criticism of the book, which is, you, Janine Cummings, are not brown. I am brown. You, Janine Cummings, got an enormous amount of money, 7 figures. I, brown person who writes as well, never got a lot of money for my book. The end. I think that's a good summary. Okay, fair enough, yeah. That's not what she wrote. Can we just add that Janine Cummings is actually, her grandmother is from Puerto Rico. Latino. Her grandmother is from Puerto Rico. She can, and by the way, in Ireland, you can play for the Irish soccer team if you've got a grandparent who is Irish. Yes, you can get an Irish passport if your grandparent is Irish. I mean, yeah, I think I have all these quotes from that lady. But I think what she just... I like this bit that she said here. She says, she's so angry, this woman. Miriam Gorba, yeah? Miriam Gorba. By her own admission, Cummings, this is what she says, lacked the qualifications to write American Dirt. She did it anyways for a 7-figure sum. A 7-figure sum. As Bart Simpson used to say, ay, caramba. So are you suggesting, Anne, that the criticism of this may not be based on pure... either literary merit or indeed on ethnic merit? There might be sort of... Can I admit to something here? My husband's going to know the moment I start saying this. Can I admit to now and again opening the newspaper and reading about someone who's just got a fabulous book deal and their book has been made into a movie and they've got 7 figures and they've got five book deals? Can my husband acknowledge that I feel extremely jealous of people like that? All-consuming jealousy, but I would love that to be me. 1 year ago, I could not have. Imagine that. Yes, I was appalled. I secretly did not respect it. Okay, but I know what Phelan's saying now. I have matured now. I have moved on, and I've had a life-changing experience in that regard. We call it the cronut effect. There you go. Oh yeah, all right, that's too much of a tangent.
No, we lived above the guy who invented the cronut. In
New York.
2013, there's been lines outside his shop since 2013, and it made me really question my belief in capitalism, not because it was doing any harm, but because
of your jealousy.
Because of my jealousy. So I understand your jealousy.
So anyway, basically, this woman, Gorba, wrote this scathing review in this blog post, and it started to get traction.
Yes.
And and basically, cut to a week after the publication of this book, which was highly celebrated. The whole world, as I said, loved it. Flatiron Books, who were the publishers, cancelled the book tour that Cummings had been planning. And in the same statement, they apologised for using barbed wire decorations at the launch of the book.
Which I don't understand at all, because the barbed wire is to represent the border, and it's like...
No, but it's actually a representation of the cover art. So the book
Yes, I know, but the cover art is beautiful, it's perfect. It's Mexican flowers or birds with barbed wire. It's to sum up feeling trapped, both physically, mentally, trying to escape. It's a great image. Men Behind the Wire is one of the most famous Irish rebel songs. The barbed wire is a strong image for a strong issue, which I thought these Latinx or Latino authors cared about.
And go on then.
But then they cancelled the book tour because of security reasons. And then, I mean, the responses have the people who are against this have very often shown really, really why they're against it. Like, for example, on January the 30th, in the middle of this crazy times, The Guardian published an op-ed by author Daniel Olivas, and he explained why Latinx writers are so angry about the circumstances. He said, while the folks who run Flatiron Books have every right to pay 7 figures to buy and publish a book like American Dirt, they have no immunity from valid criticism. Get that, 7 figures. American Dirt is an insult to Latinx writers who have toiled, some of us for decades.
Some of us for decades.
To little notice of major publishers and book reviewers. In other words, look at me.
Look at me. I didn't get
the 7 figures. I didn't get success. I didn't get reviewed 3 times in the New York Times.
And and this is complete nonsense, by the way, because there's this idea when you start to read into the criticism about what happened with this book, that Latino writers have been ignored for years. They're all ignored and everything. It's like, I was thinking, what was that Gabriel Garcia Marquez fellow with the 1,000 Years of Solitude that every person we ever met, ever, had a copy of? At least one copy.
Can I just say something? I was a liberal then and I still hated it.
Good for you, fella. And
Yes.
what about Isabel Allende? Allende. Isabel Allende, who, by the way, is a brilliant writer. But, this idea that there are no writers out there, Gabriel,
No Latino writers.
Just madness. But anyway, it got so bad, as I said, that Flatiron cancelled the book tour. And that same day, by the way, that they did that, 82 writers signed an open letter to Oprah Winfrey asking her to reconsider her endorsement of the book. Another 58 writers endorsed that letter after its publication, bringing the total to 140.
And to be fair to Winfrey, she did stand
very
up.
Fair to her. I'm very happy with that, by the way.
Yeah, she says if one artist is silenced, we're all in danger of the same. Now, she did kind of prevaricate a little bit later and sort of, did say later on that maybe that she needs to look more for Latino writers, but she did stick by it. But it really has shown some people to be really horrible people.
Yes.
And shows how bitchy the publishing world is and the writers' world is, and how so much of this is driven by people rewriting history. The worst offender is Luis Alberto Urrea. Not the worst, but the worst we've come across. I'm sure there's even worse. He was interviewed on NPR. They did a NPR Latino USA program, and he was talking about how crushed he was, destroyed by realizing that a scene from the book was very similar to a scene from his memoir, his childhood memoir. And it's a scene of kids getting crushed by a garbage truck, which, by the way, the scene is similar, but it's a fairly universal image in literature and in movies. Kids get garbage trucks getting reversed over, because they're always in around houses and that. I've seen that a few times in movies. So, but let's hear how he felt, how he says how he felt. Let's hear.
I felt sick at heart, honestly.
And let's hear another quote.
And two things New York said to me, which I've never forgotten. One, nobody cares about starving Mexicans. That was a rejection from a New York publisher. And my response was, I know you don't care. That's why I wrote the book.
So
nobody cares about starving Mexicans.
Yes, but then let's hear how what another editor said.
But the other one, which stung and will show you how Mexicano I really am, because it was going out under the name Luis Urrea, right? An editor from New York in the rejection told me no American reader is going to read a book by somebody with a name as strange as yours.
So no one is going to read a book with a name like yours. But so that is very interesting.
Well, I think one of the things I think about where we listen to those people, where he quotes those publishers,
yes,
is why doesn't he just name them? Because it's pretty awful that somebody said no one is ever going to publish a book because of your name. And I'm thinking, well, that's not true, because obviously Gabriela Garcia Marquez had quite a name and it didn't cause him problems. And loads of people have written books with really difficult names and people get fine, they get over it. In fact, they even really like it. But anyway, he said, so he made this whole point, you know, he was crushed. He's crushed, and he told a story about his wife reading the book and that she was really upset about it. But it's very interesting. In the same interview,
in the same program later on, and this is where NPR
are so dishonest.
They interviewed Janine Cummings
about
her stealing of this account, and she then quoted from a number of letters that she'd received from the same author, Luis Urrea,
where he had tweeted about the book, publicly tweeted about the book, and said all these things. Let's listen to that.
We did send this book to Luis Alberto Urrea, you know, early in the galley form. He's someone I have admired. He sent me what was one of my favorite all-time tweets over the summer. He said to me, "We are the cavalry riding into the sun, carrying water." And then he reached out again and told me that he was very pleased to have seen himself in the pages. I understand, I haven't read specifically the thing you're referring to. I also am aware that Urrea has weighed in on this and not in my favor.
Yeah, and you know, we're coming to the end of this now. I mean, you know what's really sad about that is that they have literally ruined this woman's life.
Well, no, I mean, sorry, I think what's really sad is that NPR didn't go back to that author and say, excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
You said you were crushed when you read this initially. You weren't. You wrote these really nice things about the book. You wrote these really nice things about the author.
You're a big liar.
Now you're saying you're crushed. Aren't you rewriting history? Aren't you becoming part of the mob? Why don't you stand up? Either you believe what you wrote down. If you don't, then you're a liar, or you're a liar now. Which is it, sir? You know, because this reporter on NPR is very hard on Janine Cummings.
Oh yeah, that's true.
But she's not hard on Mr. Urrea.
And just as a little moment of a fact check that we just saw was really funny. So we looked up the book by Mr. Urrea, which is The Lake of Sleeping Children, on Amazon. And the great thing about Amazon is you really, there's nowhere to hide. They just don't, you know, if anyone likes your book, you get a tick mark for that, and it's great. So basically, Mr. Urrea's book on Amazon has, how many people have rated it? 35. And of those 35 people, 29 people have reviewed it. Now, that's in contrast to American Dirt, which has how many ratings, Phelim?
7,716.
Yeah.
How many reviews did we work?
And I don't even know how many reviews. I don't have that here. But I mean, honestly, people obviously really love the book, and you'll see that and you'll hear that. But I think that
you felt.
I haven't finished. So I haven't finished reading the book. I mean, I think it's one of those. It's kind of a page turner. It's a very action packed. It's kind of a book that you pick up at an airport, I think. But it's probably better than that. But I think I'm more interested, and I think both of us are more curious exactly about how this woman has been treated. And the very last piece of the interview that we want to listen to just now is about what does she think right now?
What about the future?
Do you think that you will write about migrants again? Do you worry?
Nope.
No.
That's a hard no. I'll be honest with you. At this moment in my life, I can't imagine writing another book again. I can't see beyond this moment right now.
So there you are. There's NPR, and they're delighted with themselves. They've destroyed a writer's life. She doesn't know if she'll ever write another book again. So that's the wokerati. That's what they could be coming for you next, by the way.
Yeah.
So we feel very sorry for this Janine Cummings. And what's really interesting, by the way, is the reason everyone piled in at the beginning and loved this book was because actually the woke really loved this book because it was shining a light on the migrant experience and the border and all of that, and being very sympathetic towards Mexicans and all of that kind of thing. And yet, and then one person writes in and basically goes, oh, but she's not brown.
Yeah.
And then they all pile in, and particularly the people who piled in are people who are just jealous.
So this is what's coming. You're going to have art now that can only be, and you can't be half this or half that or a quarter of that. So Elizabeth Warren can never write about Native American, can never write the great Native American novel. But so it's conservatives, just to let you know, the art is going to get worse and worse and worse and worse because it's going to become more and more and more and more restricted. And if you step out of line from the orthodoxy, you're going to be destroyed. And this is what happened, conservatives. You abandoned the culture 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. You don't support the arts. You don't support movies. You don't support TV shows.
It's worse than that. It's actually worse than that. A lot of very wealthy people on the right support big leftist institutions.
Yes, the Lincoln Center.
The Lincoln Center, for example. We talked about one of the Koch brothers before, who, give an extraordinary fortune to the Lincoln Center, who then went ahead and basically made art attacking him. Yeah.
But so this is what you're paying your money for. So I mean, just to get back to Obamagate, please go and fund that. Help us make that. But when you see anything, you need to get out and you need to support conservative books, and not just somebody, Sean Hannity writing 55 reasons of why Trump is brilliant or what's wrong with America these days. That's non-fiction. You need to get out and support art.
Yes. Yeah.
And you need to buy art.
Yeah.
And you need to fund art.
Yeah, and the right need to start taking art more.
Fund plays and fund writers' workshops and fund, we had our play on at CPAC. It's the first play ever at CPAC. Can you imagine that? There's been no work of art at CPAC ever. Liberals are not stupid. Liberals know. That's why the Strzok's book's coming out on the 8th of September, and that's why the Comey Rule is coming out on Showtime on the 28th and 29th of September. So
we have to have an answer to that.
We have to have an answer to that.
And we need to do it.
So go to the unreportedstorysociety.com.
Help us be the people who do that, who tell that story in an entertaining way, because they're certainly doing it. Yeah. And we're now going to go over to our interview with Brian Godawa.
Yes. So very interesting interview with a very interesting person. It's all there in the interview. Let's go over now. We recorded it just before we came on air, so let's hear that interview. Okay, so we're delighted to be joined today by our good friend Brian Godawa, who is misbehaving on the screen.
Already behaving badly.
I'm a clown.
Yes, we know that. But he's also our good friend, a fellow Angelino transplant, a screenwriter and best-selling author. So he is a new type of author. He's an inspirational author, I suppose you could call him, and I mean that literally and metaphorically. Brian writes biblical fiction and some Hollywood screenplays as well, and we'll get on to that. But the biblical fiction is what we wanted to talk about today, in that he fictionalizes parts of the Bible that are referenced but not detailed in the Bible. So I suppose he fills in the gaps and adds to them. And very interestingly, his books are self-published, but they are bestsellers on the Amazon biblical fiction category, beating out books from established authors, but also from traditional publishing houses with huge infrastructure, huge marketing budgets, access to bookshops and all. Brian does it all in himself, and he beats out those established authors. His novels, his biblical fiction, they read like Hollywood blockbusters, and they're meant to be fast-paced, exciting reads, and that is probably because he is an actual Hollywood screenwriter and has actually written Hollywood blockbusters. So welcome today, Brian.
Welcome, Brian.
Yes.
Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So we have many questions, and I'm sure our...
I want to start by asking, what is biblical fiction?
Well, Phelan was pretty accurate in that it's basically you're retelling stories in the Bible, and you're sort of retelling them in a way that modern day people can relate to. That's not necessarily mean that they're making a modern version, but just retelling the stories. And it's interesting because this is actually something that the ancient Jews did a lot. They had the Bible, but they also retold stories in their own time eras as well, in order to sort of, bring it home to their own people. And then, sometimes they would fill in between the gaps of, like you mentioned, the Bible sometimes the stories are kind of short, and so we'll tell all the stuff in between to link the stories, and that allows us to write fiction that's respectful of the Bible while also allowing us some freedom to tell, some exciting stories.
Give us an example now of your latest one, Jezebel. Just give us a little summary of that.
So I wrote a book that's out called Jezebel, Harlot Queen of Israel. And it's the story of the most ruthless queen in all of ancient Israel history. And in fact, she's probably, most people have heard of that name, Jezebel, right up there with Cleopatra, but she's sort of the opposite of Cleopatra in that she's the bad girl. And interestingly, nowadays, because of feminism, they've tried to sort of change her image and say, well, she was just oppressed by the patriarchy.
So you took her story and developed it, is that right?
Yeah. So in other words, the Bible will tell you things like, Jezebel does this, and then Elijah the prophet comes along, and then it might jump like 3 or 4 or even 10 years at a time. And then that's where we'll fill in between the text.
Yes. So how did this biblical fiction start?
I love actually, by the way, can I just say, I love how this all started, because it's one of those learning things for everyone, and it's inspirational because you found your, you found your niche because of a failure, not a failure, but something bad happened, right? And instead of saying, God, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, you actually turned it around. Tell the story of what happened. I think it's a great story.
We're talking like 10 years ago. I've been a screenwriter. I wrote my best movie that I'm known for is To End All Wars, which stars Kiefer Sutherland. That was
amazing, and we talked about on this show before. Highly recommend it.
Great, yeah. Well, that's what I'm known for, and then everything else I did was crap. But I'm just kidding.
No.
True.
But so anyway, so here I am, I love Hollywood movies and I love the Bible, but I love the ancient world, and the ancient world has some fascinating stories. And in recent years, you're seeing movies like Clash of the Titans and all these Greek gods and stuff. So I'm thinking, okay, they're open to this kind of stuff. And I started studying, and coming up with this idea about a Bible character that I thought would be totally for Hollywood, no problem. Ancient world, angels and demons, all this kind of cool stuff, but also something that, religious people would enjoy who like the Bible. So I started researching and came up with this amazing stuff, wrote a script, started taking around town. I'm not a big wig in the town, so it's a little bit harder for us little guys. Anyway, then I found out Darren Aronofsky was making a movie, and that movie was Noah. And that was my script, was called Noah Primeval, actually. And, so then I realized, okay, the chances are this guy's probably going to get his movie made before I am. So I thought the stuff that I found was so fascinating, things like about giants and all weird things. And I thought, you know what, how can I beat him to the punch, and so that I won't feel like I'm derivative, And I realized, well, it's time for me to turn it into a novel, because I could get it into a novel within a year, and it takes some movies, sometimes 3-4 years to get made. So I did that. It was my first novel I ever wrote, and I put it in, and this was right around the time when Kindle ebooks was just starting to explode on Amazon, see? And I did it self-published. Actually, I tried to get an agent, Christian agent, and a publisher, because it's based on the Bible, Noah Primeval, and no one would take me. And the reason why is because it was too Hollywood. I have some sex and violence in there, and because the Bible's rated R, so I have no problem, dealing with the sin of mankind in stories. Nevertheless, I couldn't get an agent, I couldn't get published. So I thought, hey, let's do it self-published, and I self-published it, and it exploded, and it kind of surprised me. And then I realized, you know what? This is a good thing, and I've got more stories to tell. And then I started to write the series called Chronicles of the Nephilim, which is now 8 books, and it goes from Noah to Enoch to Abraham to King David, all the way up to Jesus, actually, where I've got demonic warfare going on and stuff like that. So it was an inspiration that actually ended up being something that now I make a really good living writing biblical fiction. Now, here's one other interesting thing about biblical fiction. If you look online, if you look on Amazon, you know, that category, basically you're going to see books written by women, for women, about women characters in the Bible. And look, I'm not against that, okay, but I'm just saying, you know, you've got all these books
controversial.
Yes, all these books on like Sarah, Micah, the wives of David, the wives of Solomon. And I'm like, now here I come, and I've got like these action-packed, you know, full of war epics, but I also have romance. I will say that I do have romance, but it's more like Hollywood blockbusters, and it's more masculine in that sense, you know, I guess. And I come in, and my series has been dominating the biblical fiction category for the last 9 years, and I've just been grateful about that. But like I said, I'm proud of the fact that a lot of women love my stories as well, because they are also, yes, women, most readers are women, and they love the relational things. And I'm not into just action, for action's sake. I love relationships as well in my stories, because that's the nature of human drama. So I put that stuff in there, and they're drawn to it as well. And they, I think it's probably a change of pace for them, which they enjoy.
How do people respond to stories about the Bible? Are they worried about it? Do they see it as blasphemous?
Yeah, I was worried about that, because I come from a background that's, pretty conservative religiously. And I've also worked in the Christian product realm with books and albums and all this kind of stuff. So I'm very familiar with their tastes, and as well as, Christian movies at times. And so I was actually worried about that, because what I'm doing in my novels is I'm not just, I'm trying to stay true to the Bible, but I'm still adding fiction in there. And people are sinners, and people have failures. And we're talking kings like David had failures, and I'm not afraid to deal with that. And I was actually worried. Plus the fact that in my series, I'm trying to, in the Bible, it talks about how there's spiritual warfare going on. It doesn't say a lot about it, but the idea here is that there are angels and demons in the unseen world. And I wanted to bring that into my stories as well, the supernatural angle, because it's sort of like fantasy, a fantasy genre. So I use fantasy as a genre to show the spiritual realm. So I also have spiritual stories going on with angels and demons, if that makes sense. And I thought that even that was going to be really risky, because I'm entering into this area that the Bible doesn't talk a lot about. And I was worried that a lot of Christians would consider it blasphemous, or, you're playing with the word of God. And I was actually surprised to discover that that was not, by and large, the case. Now, look, there is always going to be a few people who do that, and they hate that. And, you're going to hell for writing that, but we're talking like I can count them on my hand. And after all these years, not everyone has liked my writing, but those who it wasn't because, it's anti-biblical or anything like that. What I discovered was a lot of modern Christians actually are appreciative of imagination and fiction, much more so than the world tends to paint them. They always paint Christians as like, they're the ones that protest the movies and stuff like that. And it's like, no, they get imagination and they accept it far more than most people really realize, because they've done that with me. What most Christians protest, like when that movie Noah came out, what they were protesting was not that they're making a movie about the Bible, blah, blah, blah. It was they made God look out to be a bad guy, and Noah was crazy. And that's what they hated. Yeah. And that all you have to do is just not show your heroes to be crazy men, and don't show God as an evil being. And Christians will be very accepting of you.
Yes.
And just on that issue of the books, who is your audience? I mean, these are not for children. When you talked about like the kind of little R-rated or X-rated or whatever, more kind of action-packed, more Hollywood. So what kind of age group who are these people who are reading your books, or who are attracted to your books?
That's a good question because I actually re-edited them after a few years because I did want to actually make a wider audience. And so they're basically, I usually say mature teens and over. And so I tell people, yeah, look, if you've got mature teens, they're not explicit. Look, I'm not afraid to deal with things like adultery and look, even genocide and rape, right? But I don't get very explicit. But the fact that I deal with it can sometimes, you have to have some maturity. And that's kind of what I tell people. I tell people they're rated PG-13. And so when I first started out, I'm like, I'm going to write sex and violence like a Hollywood movie because, if Christians don't like it, tough beans. But after a while, I realized, you know what? It's like, I want more people to read the books. Here's the thing. When I went back and re-edited it and just sort of made it a little bit more creative, it was like the 1940s and the Hays Code with movies. I actually became more creative, and I actually prefer writing with more subtlety now because it's just more creative and interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like poetry. When you're restricted, when there are rules that you have to fall within, it actually forces you creative. Someone once said the enemy of great art is unlimited time and unlimited budget. And I would say unlimited, no rules is also the enemy of great art. Keeping within the rules forces you to be better.
But your latest novel is Jezebel, Harlot Queen of Israel. Explain the basic story for those who don't know.
Of Jezebel. And Scaredy Cat, just to update you, Scaredy Cat just entered the room.
So that's Top Cat there.
Oh, it's Top Cat.
Yeah.
Scaredy and Top, my love, because I do love them. I'm a fan of the show, so. So Jezebel is a fascinating story that actually is very relevant to today by analogy. But it's basically the story of, we're talking about like 9th century BC Israel. Judah and Israel are split. So the nation of Jews is split between North and South, Judah and Israel in the North. And what happens is, it's the late Bronze Age. So there's a lot of warring going on, right? And Damascus and Syria is warring with everyone. So what happens is Israel makes a treaty with Tyre. Tyre is on the Phoenician coast. I think most people have heard about, Phoenicia and all that. They're like a trading port. They're like a modern day city, like what New York used to be, not anymore, of course, or LA, right? So Tyre is like that. They're like the cosmopolitan world, part of the world there, and they draw in cultures from everywhere because they're a trading port and all this. So what happens is they control the seas and trade, and Israel is sort of well placed to protect the roads for merchants and travel in Canaan. And so they make a treaty so that they kind of control both those areas against Syria. So that's the kind of like the war scenario going on. Well, the treaty is made, as they usually are with kingdoms, by a marriage. And so Jezebel is the daughter of the king of Tyre. She marries King Ahab of Israel. And that marriage is what would turn out to be the death knell almost for Israel, because what happens is she brings in pagan Baal worship to Israel that ends up polluting and corrupting the whole nation to such an extent that it ends up leading to the exile, which I don't know if people know about that, but Israel was ultimately brought into exile. And so the fascinating thing about it is here, and so that's kind of what's going on. And Jezebel has a bad rep, but I came at this like, I don't want to write cliche stereotypical characters. So to me, Jezebel is not some evil witch who wants to kill everybody. No, I actually think, and when you read the text, this is another thing. So people have this idea of Jezebel. Yeah, she's like this slut, and even the title of my novel is Harlot Queen, right? But that's an analogy. That's not literal. That's spiritual. And the misunderstanding is that she was some kind of slut. She wasn't. In fact, the way the Bible writes about her, she probably was very in love with Ahab, and they probably had a pretty good marriage for a short period of time. So I wrote it as a story of she's an upper scale, like a New York socialite or whatever, and she thinks, oh, this Israel is just this country bumpkin. They're like Texas, They're ignorant. They don't know the cosmopolitan culture that I can bring to them. I can help them become more sophisticated, right? It's got that condescending elitist mentality, but nonetheless, she believes what she believes. So she's bringing it in and trying to help them. But the problem is, of course, God doesn't want them worshiping Baal. And eventually they build a temple to Baal as well. And then what happens is, this is when most people hear about the prophets in the Bible, right? Oh yeah, Isaiah and Elijah. This was actually the beginning of the line of prophets that came to call back Israel to Yahweh with Elijah. Elijah was the first. Now there was always like individual prophet or little prophets going around, but Elijah was the first major prophet that started the line of prophets. And he rises up and says, no, I'm going to speak against this. And so there's this push and pull between the two. And the famous incident that most people have heard of, if they know anything about it, is the confrontation on the I got a brain fart. Mount Carmel. And what this was Elijah called a drought on all the land for 3 years because of this Baal worship. And Baal was a storm god, so that was partly sort of mocking him, right? So finally, he comes in and says, look, I tell you what, we'll have a contest of gods. We'll go to Mount Carmel, build an altar, each of us, and we'll call upon our gods. You call upon Baal, I'll call upon Yahweh. And the God who answers with fire from heaven that burns up the sacrifice, he's the God, right? And of course, that's really gutsy, right? So he does this, and the Baal prophets go and they cut themselves and they demonic worship and all this stuff, and nothing happens. And then Elijah finally just simply comes down by himself, prays, calls down God, fire from heaven comes down, right? And so it's just this amazing, amazing situation that God wins. But what's so fascinating is the story doesn't end there at all. That's the middle of the story, because what happens is right after that, Jezebel's ticked off. She's got balls, man. I'm telling you. She goes to Elijah. She goes, oh yeah? Well, if you aren't dead like my prophets in the morning, then I'm not Jezebel. So she threatens him. And you know what Elijah does? And he became famous for this too. He runs. You have this prophet of God who called fire down from heaven, and Jezebel threatens him, and he runs away for 40 days down to Mount Sinai. It's like, what kind of, boy, he had no guts at all, but yet in a way, I can really relate to that, because, it's very relevant to our lives in the sense of, look, even these great men of God, they also had weaknesses as well. So there's a lot of that connections. But if I can wrap this up with the connection to the modern day. So there's a couple elements that I thought was really fascinating. One was this, elitist city versus the country, which is very relevant for today, but also the abortion issue, because Baal worship brought child sacrifice, and it was rooted in that religion. And so Israelites were sacrificing their children to Baal. And if you're at all in the pro-life movement, you're familiar with the phrases that we'll use, like the abortion mills are like temples to Baal, and you're sacrificing your children to Baal. And that's not just a rhetorical. It's like the same reason why they sacrifice children today, for the convenience of your life, because you're worried, because you can't take care of them, or it's a terrible world, or they're going to be an inconvenience. The same reason why they sacrifice their children to Baal. In the ancient world, when there was trouble in the city, or trouble, famines, or what have you, anything even in your personal life, they would sometimes take their firstborn, ideally, and they would sacrifice the child in order to protect them in their convenience from the bad things going on in the world. So there's that analogy that comes out.
Sorry to interrupt you, Brian. That's just like, who was that actress who got up recently at an award show and said, I would not be as successful as I am now if I had not had my abortions. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that is things are going bad in your life, sacrifice, have an abortion, and it will be better.
So here's the thing. So here we are in a modern day world. We look back on child sacrifice, and it's so outrageous. We think, who could possibly do that, right? Who could possibly do that? So my goal in telling the story was, I wanted to write it to understand through the ancient world's eyes, to try to figure out how could they have justified it. In other words, if you're in their mindset, how would they see it and how would they justify it? Because it wouldn't be outrageous like it is to us, right? And so that was my goal, to tell that story. So in a way, it's like getting into the mind of a person who commits an abortion that I don't agree with. And it's crazy to us in the pro-life world, but not to them. So I did the same thing with child sacrifice, because after all, like I said, in that time period, it wasn't outrageous. So that was one. And then the last connection is there's also, I see some analogies between like feminism, because here Jezebel is a strong woman, and socialism as well. So if you read my novel, you'll see some analogies and some connections going on there, because it's all about, she's bringing in the government. The government can take care of us. And God is saying, no, I am your government. I am your king. Worship me, that kind of a thing.
So it's Jezebel, Harlot of Israel. And it's a good intro to all your work.
Well, I wanted to make the point that Harlot Queen of Israel is a spiritual term, meaning she brought in another god to worship. And God in the Old Testament talked to Israel as if Israel was his wife. And so he said, when you worship other gods, you're committing adultery, see? So that was kind of the analogy. And throughout all my novels, Noah Primeval, Enoch Primordial, Chronicles of the Nephilim, and if you want to find it, that's how you can find it, as well as some of my other series. The premise is I'm showing these ancient demonic spirits and how they capture people's hearts and minds. And the Bible has this weird sort of thing about it, that it talks about how there's like a connection between heaven and earth. You know how Jesus said, on earth as it is in heaven. They believed that there were spiritual powers in the heavens that were linked to the earthly powers on earth. So that when there was a war between kings, for instance, mostly the authorities, when there was a war between kings on earth, there was a war in heaven. So that was kind of their mentality of how they saw things. And I tried to capture that and repicture that. And I'll say, this is what I'll say. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings. You read this, and that's why I was also worried that people will think it's too fantasy, but they get it. It's like, it's fantasy, but it's because it's supernatural, spiritual world, not like there really are dragons or whatever, but that's part of the spiritual realm, if that makes sense.
So where do people find your books, Brian? Where's the best place for people to find your work?
I'm exclusively on Amazon, and they're in paperback, ebook, and audiobook, all of them. And there's several series: Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Watchers, and Chronicles of the Apocalypse. And what I want to say about that is it's exclusively on Amazon. The reason why is because Amazon provided us little people, the self-publishers, with a platform to be able to sell, unlike anything anywhere. And so I put all my eggs in that basket. I'm hoping that they don't cancel me someday, but anyway, that's kind of what's going on with that.
So we ask all our guests 2 additional questions. We ask them for their go-to recipe that they're famous for in their house, and also for a piece of art that's important to them. So can you tell us what is your recipe then, please, Brian?
Well, I'm not much of a cook, although my wife is a nurse, so there have been many years when I have had to cook for myself, but I'm not really into it. So there's nothing that comes to my mind other than there's something that I do that it's not very unique, but it kind of is, and that is popcorn. Now, so I use an oil popper that does a spinner thing, and I use virgin coconut oil, which you're not supposed to use if you're going to be healthy, and I use popcorn salt, and I add butter. So it's drenchy, and it's unlike anyone else's popcorn that I've ever had anywhere. So I think I'm pretty proud of that.
Well, I personally, popcorn is evil.
Phil's not a popcorn fan. He just doesn't get it. But I'm a fan of popcorn. And what about a piece of art then? What's the piece of art that you'd like to share with people, or you'd recommend to people?
It's got to be 2, because at first, for most of my life, it was they're movies. It's always going to be a movie, just so you know. Chariots of Fire was the first movie, or I think it was made in '81 or something like that. That was the first movie, won an Oscar, about a muscular Christianity, as they call it, about a Christian runner, Eric Liddell, and that was the inspiration that got me into movies, actually, because I realized at that point that, wow, you can really have Christian faith in storytelling and be in the secular world, and and have a great story and win an Oscar and all that. And I'm proud to say that when my movie Twin Old Wars came out, World Magazine actually called it that, the Chariots of Fire of the New Century. So that was like my life dream. However, I will admit that in 1992 or 3, a movie came out that was bowled me over. And after a few years, it displaced Chariots of Fire. And that movie was Braveheart. Braveheart to me is the quintessential just movie that has everything in it. It's got the action, it's got the romance, it's got a great actor, one of the best directors in my opinion, and the story is actually very much of a Christian analogy of a Christ story, as well as just great history. I love epics, so it has everything, and it's often the movie that I go to as a screenwriter structurally. Like when I'm getting in a bind writing a story and stuff, I go, well, wait a minute, what happened in Braveheart? Because it's such perfect structure. So that took over, and that's now my fave.
And just before we finish, and thank you for all the time today, Brian, but before we finish, I just wanted to kind of remind people again that Brian wrote the screenplay for To End All Wars, which is the film that Unbroken should have been. So we talked about it here before. We had talked about Unbroken. I had read the book. The book is wonderful. It's the story of Zamperini, who was this incredible man who, Olympic athlete, extraordinary story of getting captured by the Japanese, put into a concentration camp, a horrible life, saved over and over again, extraordinary thing. Kim comes back to America, becomes, terrible, just starts drinking, behaving badly with his wife, just terrible, and then finds Jesus. His life turns completely around, and he devotes the rest of his life to Jesus. And he basically had said, in his own words, many, many times when he's interviewed, that nothing about his life mattered except for the Jesus part. And once that Jesus came into his life, and of course, then they managed to make a movie, Unbroken, which left Jesus completely out of it. And we had mentioned that, and it made the film torture porn. It made the movie a torture porn thing. It was like, why bother making this movie? We know terrible things happen to people. We all know that. We know about the Holocaust. We know about this. But why would you make a movie just focusing on the torture? Because maybe something else happened. And of course, actually, that's exactly what happened in the case of Unbroken. And you did it right in To End All Wars, which we would highly recommend. It is very violent. I found it very violent. It's tough going. So maybe not so much for younger viewers, but really, really powerful. And
it's the same kind of very similar story. They're in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. The hero there is Ernest Gordon, but the premise of that is they're suffering. There's no way to escape because they're in the middle of nowhere and nothing but ocean around them, and they're dying of hopelessness. Yes. And so they get an idea, well, what if we can give the men hope? And they're able to get together some books like by Aristotle and Plato, and they go, let's start a little jungle university and teach men, have classes, so it gives them something to hope for. And one of those books they found was a Bible. And so they start teaching the Bible, and they start learning how to love one another, because before that it was all, survival of the fittest, every man for himself. Then they start to love one another. And then as time goes on at the end of the war, they learn, what does it mean to love your enemy, the Japanese? Yeah. And that's
Don't spoil the story. Don't spoil the story for people, but I would highly recommend it. And it is pure Christianity. It's really, really very, very powerful. I'm getting shivers here just actually even remembering it as you talk about it there. So we would highly recommend that. Where can people see To End All Wars right now?
It's on Amazon, and I think you can rent it for cheap too. So yeah.
Well, we highly recommend that.
Highly recommend it. Okay, Brian. Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. You've got a website, Godawa.com.
That's it. GODAWA.com. Lots of cool stuff on there. It's not a boring website. So if you want to check that out first, or just go straight to Amazon, and there's a lot of info on the books there as well.
And we'll put up those sites on our podcast,
on our YouTube channel. So Brian, I just want to ask you: did you change when you came to Hollywood? Did you change your name to put the word God in
it? No, but I tell people, here's how you spell my name: God, AWA.
Yeah. Very good.
Well, thanks, Brian.
Thanks so much, Brian.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
And so I just want to say I would highly recommend for people to watch Brian's film to end all wars. It's really, really great.
It's very violent, but again, we talked earlier about supporting the people in the culture. So go to Amazon now, buy his books. Buy one, buy a sample.
Yeah.
It's well worth it. You'll want to buy more. Couldn't recommend them enough. And they're biblical, but they also have a relevance to the modern world, as the Bible does too, of course.
Yes.
What's on the menu this week, Anne?
So just to finish up the show, and I know it's a bit of a longer show today, but the weather is very warm here, and actually this is, I'm actually kind of contradicting myself in a way, but anyway, this is one of my all-time favorite recipes, and it's Magda's favorite recipe, and we don't make it very often because it's a little bit of a hassle.
Bit of a palaver.
It's a little bit of a palaver, but I've made it a little simpler than I used to make it. I've rejigged it a little bit. So basically, we are cooking the eggplant for the melanzane alla parmigiana, What's that name again? For the melanzane alla parmigiana, for the eggplant parmesan. And it is really lovely. And for people who are vegetarians, or if you have people coming over for dinner who are vegetarians, if you make this, no one will miss meat. Everyone will be happy to be vegetarian for a night if this is what you create. I could be vegetarian forever if this was if anyone had the will to make this every day. You need good eggplant. There's a whole thing about slicing your eggplant, salting it, and sweating it in a colander. I actually cut out that step on this occasion, and I don't think it mattered. And I think people are I think a lot of people I've been reading about, the attitude to whether or not you salt eggplant, you not salt. Don't do it. So basically, you make a really good tomato sauce, and we've used that tomato sauce in lots of other dishes as well. So the recipe will be up on the On and Film Scoop website.
Which is the unreportedstoriesociety.com.
Unreportedstoriesociety.com. Go there to get the recipe. Basically, I did the sauce in a slow cooker, and I cooked it for 8 hours. I put quite a lot of wine in it, and it's basically full San Marzano tins with full tomatoes. Throw that in. Take the peeling off an onion. Throw the onion in. You could cut it in two if you want, but you don't have to bother. Throw that in there. Put in some wine in there. You could put a cup in. I put in a little bit more than that because I just at the end of a bottle. And you could put in a couple of cloves of garlic in there. But the big secret ingredient I have is put in about half a cup of sun-dried tomatoes. Throw that all in there, let it cook down for about, as I said, for about 8 hours. Gorgeous. Oh, and the other really important ingredient that goes into that tomato sauce is about 3 tablespoons of Irish butter. Gorgeous. And then you basically are going to, what we're doing is, and you can look at this, watch us now cooking this. We're going to cook this eggplant on very hot wrought cast iron pans. I don't have 2 griddle pans, I have 1 griddle pan. Actually, the griddle pan works better. I cut the eggplant quite thin, the slices, about 1/8 of an inch. And on a griddle pan, I only have 1 griddle pan. So I had the griddle pan going, you can see the griddle pan going there, and also on the other side.
You can see this on YouTube if you're listening to it on a podcast. You can actually watch this on YouTube.
And then and then basically on the griddle pan, get those lovely markings. I'm brushing these with oil, which is going to make them very silky. These have been cooked already, but in a moment, we're going to construct the whole thing so you'll see it all. So basically, cook the eggplant until it's nicely cooked. Take it off, do it in batches, keep on going. You're going to be, with that eggplant, you're going to be not salting that eggplant, you're going to be oiling that eggplant when you put it on so it doesn't cook, it doesn't stick. And then you construct this very much like a lasagna. A layer of tomato sauce. As I said, the whole recipe will be up on the website, unreportedstoriesociety.com. A layer of tomato sauce.
Well, you can see it on the video.
And you can see it there. A layer of tomato sauce, then the eggplant, then Parmesan cheese. Again, don't bother grating the Parmesan cheese. Throw it into the what's that called?
The thing you put the cocktails into? No?
No, the thing that goes whiz around. Like that you use for making...
Cocktails?
No. What do you call that thing? Blender. There you go. Throw it into the blender so that you don't have to bother trying to create that huge amount of cheese there. And a layer, sprinkle some Parmesan, more sauce, more eggplant, then a layer of mozzarella slices. You can see us putting out the mozzarella slices there, and then more and more up to the top. Then the last layer is tomato sauce, and then a really nice covering of Parmesan cheese.
That's grated. That's whizzed up Parmesan cheese.
Yeah, but don't buy pre-grated Parmesan because that's like just the spawn of the devil. It's the worst thing ever. Always do it freshly grated. So this is done now, and basically it's going to go in the oven
for how long?
I'm always very loath to give people very direct, very specific numbers here, but I would say we want to do about 40 minutes at least at 350. But you want to keep checking that, because you want everything to get really integrated, and you want that eggplant to get really cooked down, and your sauce to get cooked down, and your cheese to melty all over the place. Take it out of the oven and let it sit for about 5 minutes, because it'll be piping hot. Serve that with crunchy bread, yum, 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 yum. Sourdough
lovely.
crunchy bread, which we have learned to eat a lot of, and a nice crunchy green salad, because the actual melanzane will be very soft and you want crunch to go with that. And eat that with a big red wine, like the red wine that I recommended last week. And by the way, I looked up eggplant earlier just to give us some information, and I thought this was very interesting. Don't look at the screen there, Phelim, I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think an eggplant is?
It's a vegetable.
It's not. It's a fruit. And in fact, it's a berry.
It's a berry?
Yeah, isn't that one? It's a berry, and it grows on a short bush where the berries sprout and hide beneath big leaves. Hence the term nightshade. It's lovely. Wait, what? A nightshade? And why won't celebrities eat them? Whatever. Poor eggplant has been fighting off a bad reputation for centuries. People thought it would give you leprosy, cancer, insanity. General bitterness.
I'm from Northern Ireland.
That'll be what happened to you then. Nightshades.
I don't think we have much
No,
eggplant
you don't have
in
that.
Northern
But anyway,
Ireland.
basically, eggplants are absolutely fabulous and gorgeous,
Okay.
and you want to definitely cook that.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much.
We've come to the end of the show.
Have you seen who joined us?
So I'll tell you who joined us and who's having a little sleep here, but I'm going to wake him up now to say hello, because some people have asked
Where's
to
Scaredy
see the
Cat?
cat. Has he opened his eyes there? Oh, he's very upset now. Hello, sweetie. Okay. Oh, Mr.
See him on
Scaredy
YouTube. You
Cat.
can see him on YouTube.
Mr. Scaredy Cat. Look at him here now. Look at him. Ooh, he'll not be happy with
What's
me.
the phone? What's the
He
camera?
won't be happy
What's
with
the camera?
me.
Okay, folks. Well, thank you for tuning in. Please don't forget to leave comments wherever you want, wherever you can, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye.
Oh, not bye. We're going on a little special trip this weekend. We're going to bring you lots of details.
Oh, yeah, special treat. So we'll tell you all about that. Yes. We're going to be following some people who are thinking of making the big exodus, the big exit from
California.
Cal exit. Is that what they call it?
Actually, we're going to Boise, Idaho. If
Oh,
you're
yeah.
there,
If you're in Boise, Idaho, let us know, because
let us
we'd
know.
love to. We'd love to meet.
We'd love to meet. So,
Yeah. So we're going to be there next weekend in Boise, Idaho.
see you there. Bye.
Bye.